I brought some snacks because I am weirdly nervous filming this because it's been a minute. But anyways, hi everyone and welcome to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be doing the best and the worst. That's a lie. We're going to be doing the most surprising and the most disappointing books of 2022. I literally told myself to not say the best and the worst, and I changed the title because I wanted to be able to incorporate like my own subjective opinions of the book as well. So they're not necessarily objectively the best and the worst books I read. I just want them to be the most surprising and the most disappointing books that I've read. The way I was gonna do it, I initially wanted to do 5 books for each list, but I couldn't narrow it down to 5. Even though I only read 43 books this year, I shouldn't be judgmental like that. I read 43 books this year and I thought that I could narrow it down to 5 and 5, but it ended up being 9 and 9. So I'm just gonna work from the bottom to the top, like from 9 to 1, and I'll give 1 disappointing book, then 1 positive surprising book, and I'll just tell you a bit about why I liked or disliked those works. So let's get into it. Number 9 on the disappointing list. The first one, or I guess the last one, I will just show you a picture. Kai by Vaishnavi Patel. So initially I was quite excited to read this book. It's like a chunky fantasy. It's about a brown girl who is kind of married off quite young, although like reasonably within the time period that she exists in, but she's married off. She has some magical powers and she tries to gain like power in this new realm, town, whatever you want to call it, and she lives in like a patriarchal society, so she's also being kind of badass and going against the misogyny there. Obviously I thought the fact that it was brown characters and like what you get to learn about like the different gods and stuff was super interesting. I just overall feel like the premise was really cool, the setup was great, the like first maybe 30-40% of the book is great, but then for me personally the story kind of falls flat, and then like towards the end I like really couldn't care less anymore by the end. And I think what kind of in the end solidified it for me was that even after finishing the book, like I have never thought about it again. There's no particular scene or no particular like theme or quote or anything that kind of sticks out to me. Okay, so then number 9 for one of my most surprising books was Once Upon a K-Prom by Kat Cho. And now this one was surprising because, so I have read one other book by Kat Cho, which was Vicious, the one about the 9-tailed fox. I'll put up a picture somewhere. And I just didn't like it very much. I was really excited to read it because I like to read books with like Korean American mix or mashup. I watched tons of K-dramas and I was into K-pop in undergrad. Obviously it's something that I like, but it was just overall disappointing, and then I didn't end up reading the second book in that series either. But then I had watched like a recent interview with Kat Cho kind of randomly on YouTube, and she seemed super cool herself, so I kind of told myself I would give her another try. And then when she came out with this book, I was like, hey, absolutely, you can sign me up. I absolutely love any of the like K-pop English book meshes. I feel like obviously if you watch like K-dramas, then this is a common trope. There are like entire series that are just like idol dramas essentially, that are like kind of like the storyline is kind of trash or tropey, but then there's a lot of like famous stars in it, and then there's a ton of like famous K-dramas that center around a K-pop idol, random girl falls in love with K-pop star, etc. Like it's a trope that's done a lot. So it's not that I'm lacking content, but in terms of like English media that does it, I feel like unless you were reading fan fiction, it doesn't really exist, or it hasn't up until recently. And obviously there's been like this boom lately of a lot of like Korean American authors who are writing books about this. And the only one that I had read that I had really liked prior to this was XOXO by Axio, who apparently is like Kat Cho's cousin, if I read the acknowledgements at the back correctly, unless there's another Axio, but I'm pretty sure she said that was her cousin. And I really liked XOXO. So when I saw this one, I was like, like this could be garbage, I would probably still like it. And then I was pretty surprised. It was actually decent. There were a few parts that I thought were kind of weird, specifically the fact that they wanted me to believe that 2 10-year-olds were like head over heels in love, and like, you know, like this is kind of not marketed, it's kind of written as like a second chance romance, but from when they were 10 years old. So I was kind of like, that part I didn't buy, although it is super K-drama-y to have them like fall in love or like be meant to be together since they were children, so I will give her that, but it was a little bit unbelievable. But other than that, it was like super cute. It was like more interesting and engaging than I had expected. I liked it a lot more than I thought I would, and overall it was just a really enjoyable read, and so I was super happy that this came out. I will continue to support these like K-drama, Hallyu, English book stuff for as long as I can, because I really hope there's more. And also I thought, I just bought this book today, like I read it a while ago, but I went today to like pick up a copy, and the inside of the dust jacket, sorry, it's like the K-pop members. I don't know if you can see because I can't see, but it is very cute, and yeah. So I'm really excited to own this. So the next disappointing read, number 8. So it was You've Reached Sam by Dustin Tao. Another book that actually, it wasn't like super hyped up, but it was very pretty. And so when I got it, I was just really excited. And I feel like since then, like when it first came out, a lot of people talked about it. And then recently, like I've seen it a lot on, to be fair, I'm not really on Book Talk, but I've seen it a lot on like the recommended by book or like TikTok approved books when you go to the bookstore. So I imagine it's somewhat popular on TikTok. I feel like I really wanted to be sad with this book, and in general, I like books that deal with grief. Oh, I guess I didn't tell you what it's about, but this book is about like a girl whose boyfriend dies and then she's able to communicate with him through a phone. Oh, I didn't even talk to you about the other book, did I? Okay, well, Once Upon a K-pom you can read about, but for this one, basically she just like, she's able to communicate with the ghost of her dead boyfriend. It's like a really cool premise. Again, I thought it was gonna be cool magical realism. I don't even remember much about the book because I read it early in the year. I just remember thinking this is very meh, it's very short, there was no emotional impact. I should have been crying and I wasn't, and I didn't like it. I gave the book away and I've never looked back. So I wish I could tell you more, but I didn't like it. Okay, so my next most surprising book was A Study in Charlotte by Brittany Cavallaro. So this was one that I actually had not bothered to pick up because I have read several, by that maybe only one, but I have read one Sherlock Holmes and like James Watson retelling. It's called Every Breath by Ali Marney. It's like super good. Doesn't get nearly as much hype as it should, probably because it's by an Australian author, and there is a bunch of other like American authors who have done similar things. But I personally liked the Ali Marney series so much that I didn't really want to read another retelling. And also, if you remember, for a while like Sherlock was like in, there was the BBC show, then there was the one, there was like an American one, I feel like it was called Holmes or something. So I was just like, this has been done. But I randomly decided to get the audiobook for A Study in Charlotte, and I think what kind of pushed me to finally get it was that Emily Henry is friends with the author, and so I just thought that that was kind of like a seal of approval. So anyways, I got the audiobook, I ended up listening to it, and I was just, I guess, surprised by how like gritty it was in the end. Like it's kind of like dark, which I liked. Like for example, it's basically about the descendants of Sherlock and Watson, and the descendant of Sherlock is Charlotte, and she's a high schooler, she's like super smart, whatever. The descendant of Watson is like this guy also in high school, and he's kind of like a brute. But the part that was kind of dark is that like he has like anger management issues, and then Charlotte herself has like an oxy addiction, and amongst other things. Like there are several trigger warnings, so like go read about them if that is something you're mindful of. But yeah, it was just like really gritty, really dark, and I really liked it. Also, the author herself is like obviously a big fan of Sherlock and has like studied them, so there's like lots of like historical tidbits in there as well. So overall, a very solid read. So next on my list for disappointing books was Yinka, Where's Your Husband by Lizzie Damilola Blackburn. This one was one that I thought I would be able to relate to. I thought it'd be funny. It is kind of marketed as Bridget Jones's Diary, but like Nigerian, which it kind of is, I guess, actually. But it's basically like this woman, she's in her 30s, her like family's putting a lot of pressure on her to get married, and just kind of like it highlights a bit of the toxicities in her community, as well as like kind of a self journey for her to like, I thought it was going to be more of a journey for her to like love herself, or like realize she doesn't need a man or something like that. But I don't even really know, honestly. I don't remember what the end message of the book is. I just remember feeling like it was kind of long for what it needed to be. Like it starts off again funny, it's good, and then it kind of drags in the middle, And then finally we get to the end, which was somewhat predictable, but then I feel like she didn't really lean into the self-love even as much as I necessarily wanted to. So overall, I just didn't like it. Like, I probably wouldn't have finished it, but then I kind of I had read so much already that I pushed through to the end. The other thing too is, like, I got the audiobook and it is narrated with a Nigerian accent, which was slightly better, but it's another one with a promising premise, but did not deliver quite as well as I wanted it to. So then next on my list of surprising books, I chose Hook, Line, and Sinker by Tessa Bailey. So this is part of like a duology, kind of, their companion novels. These ones I think are definitely really popular on TikTok, and that's probably why I heard about them. But I had never read a Tessa Bailey book before, so this one was my first one and I absolutely loved it. And then after I'd read this one, I was like, okay, well, I have to read this one. And obviously, like, I think Hannah is the superior sister. I think that oh my god, what's his name? Flynn? No, Fox. I think that Fox is the superior male love interest. So I absolutely adored this one, although both are extremely good. And I think that the one thing also that really stood out for me, at least, was that both of them take place in this like small town near Seattle where people fish a lot. Basically, I've obviously never been to the West Coast prior to reading these books. Or when I was reading these books, I had not yet been to the West Coast. And so like I absolutely love when like the setting has like a life of its own and it's super well described, and there's like all these things that come with being in that setting. And then on top of that, AAN this year, which is like a neurology conference, was in Seattle. So shortly after reading these, I got to go to Seattle, and then I just felt like I got to experience so much of what they were talking about in terms of like the weather and the rain and the cloudiness, which sounds weird, but it just made it feel like, you know, like I got to experience it and really live like they did. And I just really like a good setting. I've learned that this year with a few other books that I read as well. This will be like a side insert, but there's another romance series called Wild at Heart and The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. There we go. And those ones take place in like a small town in Alaska, and so it's like tundra-ish and like cold and snowstorms, and so it's also very like setting heavy, if you will. Like the setting is kind of part of the story, and I really liked those as well. I found the main character could be a bit of a whiny bitch, but despite that, I still really enjoyed reading about Alaska, if you will. So that was something that I kind of learned about myself reading those books. But personally, this like Seattle vibey beach seaport town romance thing, it worked for me. Okay, so on to my disappointing reads. Oh, okay, so then after that, I don't own this book either, so I'll get a picture. This one's also a TikTok recommendation. Oh no. Also a TikTok recommendation, but it was The Deal by Elle Kennedy. For this one, I don't know why I picked it up, but like so many people were reading it and I was like, oh, I like romance. And I think it was, if I remember correctly, I don't remember if they're fully fake dating or if they just like make a contract to help each other out, kind of. But either way, it was like, sounded like To All the Boys I've Loved Before-ish. But I think what threw me off so much about this book was that it kind of just highlighted like all the worst parts of like people in organized sports as opposed to like the good part. There are so many like sports films that I love that talk about like camaraderie and like being a team, believing in yourself, you know, like take your pick. But then this one like really only to me highlighted kind of like the rape culture of boys in sports. And so I was just kind of really turned off by that. And I think like there were several times where the main character is supposed to be portrayed as kind of like feminist maybe, or like, you know, goes against these things, but she kind of plays into it sometimes. I don't mean like she deserves anything. I just mean like sometimes she participates in like saying weird things. I don't know. I didn't feel like she actually challenges him on any of the like garbage that they do. So it was a no for me. And then also there was one other scene that, this might be like really particular, but there was one other scene that for me kind of ruined the romance. But I don't remember exactly why, but she decides that she wants to like be cute and prepare dinner for him and all of his teammates. And she decides to make lasagna, and there was something about that to me was just so not cute. Like, why did you choose lasagna? Like, why did the author romanticize that so much, you know? First of all, I could not imagine myself as like an 18, 19-year-old making good lasagna for myself, let alone for like a team of hungry boys. And then also like not being nervous to have them try that food. And I just also, like, I would never pick lasagna, you know, like pasta, lasagna, that's like classic campus food. It's like classic, I don't know how to cook, but I'm gonna make myself a meal food. She could have done so much more with that. She could have done like a proper dish. Not that lasagna is not a proper dish, but if I was trying to impress people, like, unless I'm making some kind of really fancy lasagna, or like, you know, that Greek form of lasagna with like pieces of eggplant in it, like, unless I'm doing something fancy like that, I just feel like lasagna would not be my go-to choice. And there was something about that whole scene and how romanticized it was that really ruined the magic for me. Because like, to me, it was akin to just like putting a bunch of chicken nuggets in the oven and then serving it, and then having the guy be like, you know, she's so domestic, she made me chicken nuggets, I love my girl. Like, it was really weird. Moving on, my next most surprising book was one that I bought in the hospital, and it was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. And this one was surprising because I don't like horror. I've never read Gothic horror. I've watched a few movies, so, you know, I know the premise of Jane Eyre. I think that's the only Gothic horror. Oh, Rebecca. I know Rebecca as well. But anyways, I wanted to read this one. Well, that's not true. It was $2 at the hospital, so I bought it and I thought I would try it. And yeah, it ended up being surprisingly good. Like, I didn't love it, but once I finished it, I was just so proud of myself for having read something out of my comfort zone. And I will say the one thing that kind of stuck with me about this book is that the descriptions were just like so vivid. Like, I think about this book a lot. I've never, like I said, read Gothic horror. This is my only book that I've read of that genre, but it really stuck with me, you know, like, and I really liked it. And I wonder if it's because I really like settings, as I said, that I've learned this year. This one had a wicked cool setting, and it has stuck with me to this day. And more than anything, again, I don't remember like the details of the book, but I just remember like the creepiness and like how I felt reading it. And it was just such an atmospheric read, and I highly recommend it. Okay, so then next on my list of disappointing book, Crescent City, but book 2, and no, I don't know their names. So earlier this year, I read book 1, and I absolutely loved it. I put this on my disappointing list, but it's only number 4 in my disappointments, and the reason for that is because Sarah J. Maas is a long-standing author, and she has already disappointed me several times, so I wasn't like totally surprised, but I was surprised because book 1 was really fucking good, and then book 2 did not deliver. So I will say, like, overall, I had kind of given up on SJM, and then my friend told me to read Crescent City book 1, and I did. And if, like me, you really liked Air of Fire and Akomath of her series, like, you really enjoy the way she does like healing from trauma and also long, very slow burn, I guess, then you'll like this one. Book 1 was absolutely phenomenal. I loved the pacing. I loved that it was this like super slow enemies to lovers. It was just mind-blowingly good, in my opinion, for what Sarah J. Maas does well. Obviously, she's still not making like a political difference, you know, she's still not trying to speak up against racism or anything like that, so don't expect any of that. But if you just want a really solid, like, fun, not even smutty, but just like a slow burn romance, I think this was amazing. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I feel like the second one is longer, and yet like not a lot happens. Like, sure, there's a little bit of smut in there, but like plot wise, relationship wise, like character dynamics wise, not a ton happened. For me, it felt extremely long. And then obviously she like throws in the ending to be like, surprise, like now you're excited again, so read the next one. I mean, I would have read it anyways, but I kind of wish like she did more with it. The ending, although really interesting and cool, just did not make up for the rest of it, in my opinion. But will I continue? Obviously, I'll continue with this one. So then I guess number 5 for my most surprising, which another one that I have. So this was another book that I randomly picked up because it was on sale at the library or at the hospital tuck shop, which if you are ever in a hospital, you should check them out because they like put every and any book, at least the one where I live, they put every and any book for $1 or $2, regardless of what condition it is in, regardless of if it's new or old. Like they have no concept of the value of the book. So this is another one that I got for like $1 or $2. And yeah, I was so happy that I picked it up. I think what struck me as like good about this was that it was just so familiar. Like it was like all the cozy vibes of like old school YA that, you know, I kind of grew up with and that I loved. It's a bit of a Cinderella story, like rags to riches. That is Cinderella, right? Anyways, it's rags to riches. There's 2 hot boys kind of pining for her. My one criticism is obviously the 2 boys that like she's interested in. You know, other than the fact that they are rich, they have nothing going for them. Like they don't have much of a personality. If you suspend disbelief for that piece a little bit, it is an otherwise fun series, and I was very surprised at how much I liked it. Next, for one of my most disappointing books, so I guess number 4, was Bunny by Mona Awad. I've given my copy away because I really didn't like it at all. Technically speaking, I kind of DNF'd this book at like 75%, but then I was like, I need to know what happens, sort of, so I kind of skimmed it and got a general idea, so I consider it read. But essentially, Bunny is about, oh, I didn't even tell you what the other ones were about again, didn't I? Bunny is supposed to be like a satire of dark academia, kinda. But yeah, I didn't get it. To be fair, like I don't think satire's ever been my forte, and I don't even know that I fully understood the critique that was happening in this book. So probably if you do, you'll like it more than I did. But for me, I think what I didn't like about it was that it was impossible to like follow. Like just the sentence structure, the way it was written, I literally had no idea what was going on. Within the span of several sentences, so much would happen, and there wasn't necessarily like cues that you could follow along. So sometimes I literally didn't understand like who was saying what or where they were, or like they might have moved locations, but I like didn't really get that they had moved because it was like so sudden and jarring. Again, I'm not saying that the book was written poorly. Maybe I just didn't understand it, but it was very, very, very difficult to follow. Like to the point where like, I don't mind a little bit of absurdism, but I just genuinely like, I had no idea what was going on half the time. I couldn't even tell the bunnies apart. Like it was just way, way too chaotic for me. And that was probably the point. But I didn't get it. And I was really disappointed because I wanted to like it so badly. Like I really, really felt like it was the type of book that could be me, you know, that I could like. And then I read it and I was like, this was like, how can I ever recommend this to anybody if I couldn't finish it and I didn't understand anything that was going on ever? So that one was really super disappointing for me. And then next on one of my most surprising books was TJ Poir Has Something to Prove. And this was written by my friend, Jasmine Dio. And so I think for me, this was a surprise because going into it, I was obviously extremely nervous. So Jasmine is like a co-resident in my program. And I obviously wanted to read it to support her, but you know, what if I didn't like the book? I was extremely nervous, like what am I supposed to say if I don't like the book? And she was very nice and had told me, just don't tell me your opinion, like I don't care either way, just don't tell me what you think of it. And I was like, okay, cool. But even still, I was nervous that, you know, I might not like it. And I think when I first started reading it, it starts off like in a debate scene, and I was like, oh, like I'm not the biggest fan of debate, and I was a little bit lost. But then once the like premise and actual story starts, it was like smooth sailing from there on out. So if you don't know, the book is about a girl who she's kind of like the center of a joke about being hairy, I guess. She's the center of this like meme that's kind of making fun of her and her cousin. Anyways, she decides after that she wants to like prove to the world that even if she were to stop removing her body hair, she would still be considered beautiful and that like society would still accept her. So it's kind of all about like women and hair removal, and it was phenomenal. It was just so good. Like I really liked it. It was super cute. But I think like what I liked the most was as you're reading it, like if you are at all, you know, a hairy girl, then you'll relate to so much of it. And I like not even just relate, like I had visceral reactions to some of the stuff that was going on. And it's just like crazy to see how ingrained some of these like thoughts are. Like, for example, like I was in grade 5, I think, when my mom and my aunt first like took me to go get waxed or whatever. And it was just like from very young, they start teaching you to like, you know, hate your body hair or whatever. And you don't even realize like how ingrained that is until you read this book and you're like, could I even do some of the things this girl's doing? I don't know. And then also like, obviously I got to go to like several signings and like interviews and hear Jasmine talk about the book and stuff. And it was like super interesting too to hear where like some of this like fear of hair on women, like where it comes from, and a lot of it comes from like transphobia, and it was just like really interesting to learn about. I also have this theory that this would make an incredibly good Netflix film. So if Netflix wants to pick it up, I think it would do really well. Like if Tall Girl did well and got a sequel, this book is this story I should say is by far way more marketable, way cooler, could teach young girls something better than not wanting to be tall. Yeah, so I really think that Netflix people, if you ever see this video, you should consider making this into a movie. And overall, I think like the message is one that's super important and one that I think we should at least like talk about, and maybe not, you know, force young girls to remove their body hair so quickly. So next on my list of most disappointing books was My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh, which is that one. So another book that I really wanted to like, that I'm sure is a critique of something or some kind of satire or something. I just didn't understand it. And to be honest, I think like the fact that there's a lot of like made up medical terms in the book. And I think like overall while I was reading it, initially I was like, oh, let me try to, you know, figure out what's wrong with this girl. And like, I was trying to like look up the drugs and stuff. And like a few of them, I was like, oh, I know that. But then a few were made up and I was like, once I realized that like medically this book is not even accurate, I know that that's like not the point of it, but I was a lot less invested and I did not care. And also it's another one where like just random stuff happens and you just kind of ask yourself why. The story really just ends up being this like privileged white girl and her depression, and that's it. And you kind of wonder why it is so popular. And the other thing too though is like the way people like the author, like Otessa, it really makes you wonder, like she seems like a really smart girly, you know? So then I really like questioned if like I wasn't understanding the purpose of the book. But yeah, I tried really hard to like it. I didn't. And I tried really hard afterwards to like think of what it could mean. And I don't know. And maybe, you know, actually now that I think about it, if I go read some like critical analysis of like this, maybe I'll like it more. I didn't get it. I'm not one of those girls, and that's okay. That brings me to like the top 3 of my surprising. So at number 3, Light from Uncommon Stars by, I don't know if it's Rika or Rika Aoki. This book was truly marvelous. I really enjoyed it. It's like several kind of stories happening at once, but it's like this sci-fi, yeah, I don't even know how to explain it really. There's like aliens and people falling in love, and then the like main story is about this like trans girl who wants to play the violin and trains to play the violin. But it's more interesting than that, and I overall just really loved the writing. I loved the different themes that it explored. Yeah, it was a solid read. Like, I have been, at least, maybe not online, but like in my head, I've been complaining for several years about how when books are marketed as like, you know, this is a trans story, or like this is like a Black girl story, or like whatever, like this one experience that it wants to highlight, sometimes I find that like the book just becomes that one experience, as opposed to like first and foremost being like an engaging, cool fantasy or sci-fi story, which is like what I like. And this kind of does that, where it's first and foremost just like this cool story with like demons and aliens and like things happening, which you should just go in blind, I think. But you know, it's first and foremost a sci-fi story, and then it just happens to center around a trans main character. And so like the different, you know, like issues that she goes through and like whatever kind of prejudice and stuff like that that she goes through throughout the course of the book, it's obviously highlighted and a big part of the story, but it's not like the story, you know what I mean? Like it's not just her trauma, it is this really cool story, and then her trauma is also like, you know, peppered in there, but then there's also like happy moments and like growth and like learning to self-love and all this other stuff. And so I just really liked it. I thought the writing was cool. The wordplay specifically in this book was really nice. And yeah, I really loved it. And I believe the author is trans as well, so it is like a own voices story. But yeah, I highly recommend this book. And then number 2 for disappointing books was On Rotation by Shirlene Obuobi. Okay, so this one I was super excited to read. I believe the author is a cardiac fellow. I was so excited because it was going to be about like this Black girl in medicine, and I really just thought it'd be relatable, or I don't know, it was gonna like not necessarily teach me things, but like put into words so many of the experiences that I have had in residency and in medical school. And it just really fell flat for me. It did not showcase nearly as much as I wanted it to in terms of just like her experiences in medicine. She is a med student, but like you still experience the things. There's still plenty of room for her to showcase different things. Yeah, overall it fell so flat for me, and I was so sad that I didn't like it. There's not much of a plot. It's basically like she is in med school and it discusses a bit of her struggles trying to figure out like what kind of residency she wants to go into, and just kind of finding support within academia. But like the main story kind of ends up being just romance, which like I'm all about the romance, but there was so much more to this book than romance. And for me, it was very insta-lovey, but also like I just didn't care about the romance. Like there was so much else that this girl was going through and that I think was more interesting and should have been kind of highlighted better. So yeah, I just did not like the book. And also like the other thing too I realized was I have like a kind of love-hate relationship with like any like movie, book, TV show that takes place like in a hospital or in a medical setting, because obviously like I work there, so I see it all the time. And when I read about it afterwards, like, you know, you'd think I'd like it, but then it just feels like I'm reading about work, and it automatically like kind of drains my energy a little bit. So that might have also played a role as well. And it's just so hard to not necessarily criticize, but to not constantly be comparing it to like the way I would do something, or the way like my center does something, or the interactions that I've had, and constantly being like, oh, this is not realistic, or oh, this is, or whatever, even though obviously there are different ways of doing things, and like, you know, each center would have its own experience, I guess. But yeah, overall it just really fell flat for me, and it did not do nearly enough to kind of like highlight or show the nuance of what it would be like to kind of be obviously like I'm not Black, but like a POC at least in medicine. So yeah, I was disappointed with that one. My number 2 for most surprising book, which I don't currently have with me because I'm trying to convince my mom to read it, but she keeps saying she's busy. It's All My Rage by Sabaa Tahir. This book fucking blew me away. It was just so good. It was so gorgeous. It was amazing. It was nuanced. It was everything. It was just, yeah, it was like soul crushing while still providing some hope. It was this perfect balance, and it just so good. It was so good. I loved it so much. And I think the part that stuck with me the most, despite the fact that, again, like it's about children of immigrants, like first-gen children in America, you know, and their parents are kind of trying to attain the American dream or whatnot, and kind of the pressures that they put on their children for this purpose. So, you know, I think if anything, I should be able to relate to the children a bit more than like the parents, but I actually ended up liking the story of the parents so much more in this, because I think it was just so interesting to see how obviously like as the kid of immigrants, like you kind of grow up resenting them a little bit, or like, you know, constantly being mad at them for not understanding your point of view, for not being like more accepting of like white ways of doing things, you know, for not being like, well, at least like for me, for not being like more Canadian, if you will, but in the book, like for not being more American. But then now that like I'm a bit older, and having read this book and just like thinking and stuff, you kind of realize like immigrating and just moving to a new country is like such a big trauma on its own. And usually they're doing it when they're really young. My parents came when they were certainly younger than I was, and part of me just really wonders if I would even be able to do what they did. And then also to like make it in the country that you move to, and then like support children and like raise them correctly and like learn a new language and all these things. And it just made me have like a newfound respect, I guess, for like that whole immigrant experience. And obviously like I know the more traumatizing side, I guess, if you will, of like growing up with immigrant parents, because like you hide so much from them and like you have to kind of learn to navigate like what you can do with them versus like what's acceptable outside and like all these things, whatever, and like identity and etc., etc. But also it was really cool to see like their perspective, and this book I think does a really good job of kind of showing you like that generational trauma and the impact that it had on the kids in the story. And I just thought it was so beautiful, and that's part of why I wanted my mom to read it, but she hasn't yet, but hopefully she will. So my most disappointing book of 2022 was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. Yes. So obviously, if you know me, you know that I really like Emily Henry, and that her other two books specifically, so obviously I love Beach Read, but then People We Meet on Vacation, like I just thought was a phenomenal book. I think like the craftsmanship of being able to write a story in that way was just great. Obviously I didn't know about When Harry Met Sally, and afterwards I watched the movie after the book, and I was like, sure, she got a lot of inspiration from that movie, but just like the fact that she was able to like tell this story over 12 years and all the like different timelines and keep it all straight, I just thought like truly that must have taken so much work, and I have so much respect for that book and the craft of writing a book like that. But also I really like the romance as well. And then Beach Read I liked slightly less, but I still really liked. This one though, I was really looking forward to, and there were specifically a few reviews that kind of made me, or I guess piqued my interest, if you will. But specifically there was a few reviews that kind of talked about how if you are the older sibling in a family, that this book is for you and you'll get it. And so I was really excited to read that because I am the oldest sibling. But then I read it and I didn't get anything. So I was left very unsatisfied. And overall, I think like for the first time, I don't even know how I can support this argument, but for the first time of all the Emily Henry books, I really felt like the whiteness of the main character showed in this one, whereas in the other two, like I was okay with it, like I was just reading it, but in this one it was just very like, sometimes I really just felt like the main character, like, you know, it wasn't that big a deal. I don't know what she was complaining about, and I just felt like some of her issues were very like white girl problems and not more universal, if you will. I don't really know how better to describe that. I don't even remember all the specifics of this book, but I do also remember thinking that the main conflict around like their bookshop could have also just been solved so easily if they had spoken to each other. And I like kind of predicted, I think it was like fairly obvious like what they were going to do in the end to resolve it, and it just felt like, you know, if they just all spoke about it sooner, it would have been solved. Yeah, I didn't like this one. I also think there were a few times where like the main character is described a certain way, but it kind of has the opposite effect of like what I think the author was intending. So like one that I specifically remember pretty clearly was that, so the main girl in this story, which I again forgot to describe to you, but the main girl is supposed to be like the like cold-hearted girl. I guess like the cold-hearted side bish character in romance movies who like doesn't really get the guy. Kind of like Emily Blunt in Devil Wears Prada, I think is like what they were going for. She's supposed to be that, and it's supposed to be how the cold-hearted side girl gets a love story. But then there were times where like I just really didn't feel like we were showcasing her cold-heartedness or like go-getter attitude. One of them, for example, and the other thing too is like she's obviously not cold-hearted. I think like it was meant to be like she just embodies a lot of like masculine characteristics and therefore would not be like the main character, you know? Anyways, so one of them is that like she's supposed to be like career driven and like spends money on her clothes, and like is also, I believe, in her 30s and like single and not very domesticated, if you will. But anyways, there was one scene where she decides to kind of like dress in designer, I believe, and her shoes are like these like fancy high heel stilettos, and that's supposed to represent that she's a bad bitch. But then like she's supposed to be walking like kind of up a hill on cobblestone or like mud or something, and the whole purpose of that scene is to like show me, you know, that she values these things like beauty and all that, and that makes her a cold-hearted person. But in reality, she just seems so stupid. Like, you could still be a bad bitch and like wear designer sneakers, you know, or like designer rain boots. So she could, like, in my head, I was kind of like, you could have just like made her smarter. So to me, it just felt like it just felt like there was something missing there. I didn't really understand the main character and like her issues and the things she would complain about. I was just like, I wasn't feeling it. Is this a solid book though? Yes. I mean, Emily Henry wrote it. It's a breeze to get through. It's still super well done. It's great writing at the end of the day because it's still Emily Henry. But I was just so disappointed, especially after her first two books. Like, this is easily by far my least favorite Emily Henry book, and it's so much lower than the other two that I was truly so disappointed. But that leaves me with my most surprising, I guess, best book of 2022. And for that, you can give me a drum roll, please. Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn. So this book was everything and then some. This book was just the most magical experience, and I just absolutely loved it. I will say an honorable mention for this spot, because to me, both these books are kind of changing the like YA fantasy game, is Babel by R.F. Kuang. Unfortunately, I'm only halfway through because I have to read it for a book club and we're not meeting until later this month. So I wasn't able to finish the book, but Bloodmarked and Babel even, I think, are just like absolutely like immaculate in terms of what they're trying to do. They are kind of similar to how I was talking about like Light from Uncommon Stars, where I was saying they're writing these like amazing fantasy books and then just weaving into it all these like themes of like racism and slavery and institutionalized racism and like being the first Black girl to do something, or like being the only Black person in a space, grief, losing parents, the idea of like where do traditions come from, and like questioning academia and all these types of things. And they're all like seamlessly woven into like a 5 out of 5 just plain fantasy read. You know, like, it's just mind-blowing that this book exists. It's mind-blowing how good this book is. I absolutely love every theme that Tracy Deonn is exploring through her work, even though I have some minor issues with the first book as well as this one. And there are small parts that annoy me, small things that obviously I would like tweaked. Even with all of that, I just think the fact that I'm finally getting fantasy that's like also dealing with POC issues, I don't even think I believe that I would live to see the day. I really truly didn't know that we would get here, and we have gotten here, and it is just so incredible, and I am in awe. I am so obsessed with both Tracy Deonn and R.F. Kuang for like making these books exist, and I think that now that they've gained so much traction, we're only going to get more and more and more and more. And what a time to be alive. What a time to be reading YA fantasy. Like, I truly do not have enough good things to say about this book. And also, Selwyn Kane can have my children. Okay, that is my favorite books, I guess, and least favorite books, but really they were my most surprising and most disappointing books of 2022. This video is already incredibly long, but if you still want to chat with me, feel free to tell me what some of your faves were, or actually don't tell me what your faves were. Tell me what your reading goals are for this year, and I will see you next time in whatever video I make. Bye!